Welcome, quiet traveler. We are glad you found your way here tonight. Tonight we will drift together toward a place buried beneath the floors of an ordinary home, where an entire ancient city waited, silent and patient, for someone to find it. So rest now, let your shoulders settle, and allow the voice to carry you slowly down through the centuries. Far away from wherever the last story left us, across a long stretch of dry hills and sun-warmed plains, the land of central Turkey rises and breathes slowly under an open sky. The town of Derinkuyu sits quietly there, low stone houses, dusty roads, the smell of bread and dry earth in the afternoon. It is the kind of place that has looked more or less the same for a very long time, calm, unhurried, rooted gently in the soil. In 1963, a man was renovating his home and knocked through a wall in his basement, expecting nothing more than a little extra storage space. Behind the wall, there was a passage, low and cool, carved smoothly into the soft volcanic rock, leading quietly downward. He followed it slowly, and then another passage opened, and another, spreading out beneath his feet like the branches of a great slow tree. What he had found was not a room, or a cellar, or even a small catacomb. It was a city, whole and breathing, 18 floors deep into the earth. The rock here is a soft stone called tuff, shaped over millions of years by ancient volcanic ash that settled and hardened into something almost gentle, easy to carve with simple tools. Whoever built this place understood that rock perfectly, the way a sculptor understands stone, pressing through it carefully, always knowing where the next room would breathe. There were rooms for sleeping, long and low, their walls worn smooth by the shoulders of people passing through in the night. There were stables, and the stone rings where animals were tethered are still there, worn into the floor in small gentle circles. There were kitchens, their ceilings still faintly blackened where the smoke of 10,000 fires rose slowly and drifted away through narrow shafts cut into the rock above. Ventilation shafts, some reaching all the way from the deepest 18th floor to the open sky above, kept the air moving gently through the whole long city. Fresh water reached every level too, carried through channels and wells that the builders cut with extraordinary patience across decades or perhaps centuries. Slowly, as explorers moved through the city, they began to understand its scale, not a shelter for dozens, but a home for perhaps 20,000 people at once. That number is difficult to hold in the mind, 20,000 people, quiet and unhurried, living their lives in the soft dark of the rock, far below the world. The city had schools, where the carved stone benches still lined the walls in small even rows, waiting. It had a church, deep on one of the lowest levels, with a long nave and a rounded apse, the arch carved with the same slow patience as everything else here. At each level, enormous circular stone doors could be rolled into place from the inside, sealing the city completely against whatever waited in the world above. Each of those doors weighs somewhere near half a ton, and they were shaped so that a single person, working calmly from the inside, could seal the passage in moments. No one knows with certainty who built Derinkuyu, though the city is very old. Some rooms may reach back before written memory, to peoples whose names we no longer know. The Hittites may have carved some of it, or peoples older still, pressing slowly into the welcoming rock during times we can barely imagine. Later, early Christian communities sheltered here for long stretches, bringing their families and their animals down through the narrow entrance passages while the world above was uncertain. They would have descended in slow processions, carrying oil lamps that threw soft-moving light across the stone walls as they went deeper. Down here, the temperature stays almost perfectly constant, cool but never cold, a steady gentle breath of the earth itself. In the deepest rooms, far below the 18th floor, there is a stillness that has no name in the world above, a quiet so old it has become part of the stone. The city was not abandoned in a hurry, everything suggests it was left behind slowly and deliberately, doors open, passages clear, as if someone simply decided one day to return to the surface. And then, in the centuries after that departure, the entrance was forgotten, covered over by the slow drift of soil and time and ordinary life. A house was built above it, and then another, and the town grew quietly overhead, entirely unaware of what lay beneath its floors. For perhaps 1,000 years, the city breathed gently in the dark beneath ordinary rooms, beneath kitchens and sleeping children and the slow turning of seasons above. Even now, with more than half of the city still unexcavated, nobody is quite certain how far the passages reach, or what else waits quietly in the soft old rock below. Somewhere in the quiet, there is only the faint sound of stone, breathing in the cool air of a still cathedral. In the northern city of Turin, in a chapel that has stood for centuries, rests a length of linen unlike any other on earth. The cloth is long and pale, woven in a herringbone pattern that was already ancient when it first entered recorded history. Upon its surface, faint and soft as shadow on water, rests the image of a man. He lies still, hands folded, face tilted slightly to one side, as though simply resting. The chapel of the Guarini in Turin holds the cloth behind a silver casket, in air kept gentle and still. For centuries, pilgrims have traveled long roads simply to stand near it, in the hush of that stone room. What they came to see was not simply old cloth, but a question that no generation has ever fully answered. The image on the cloth shows a bearded man, tall and lean, with marks on his wrists and feet and brow. The marks correspond, with quiet precision, to those described in ancient accounts of crucifixion. Whether or not that correspondence means anything, it has kept the cloth at the center of human wondering for 700 years. The first confirmed record of the shroud appears in France, in the 1400s, when a knight named Geoffrey de Charny presented it to the world. Even then, the cloth was treated as something already old, already beyond the memory of anyone living. In time it passed through noble hands, surviving a fire in Chaubery that scorched its edges and left small burn marks along both sides. The nuns who rescued it from the flames stitched patches of new cloth across the burns, their work still visible today. Slowly, across generations, the cloth made its way to Turin, where it has rested ever since in careful, reverent quiet. In 1988, scientists were given small samples and carried them away to their laboratories. 3 separate institutions tested the fibers independently, and their results suggested the cloth dated to the medieval period. And yet, no one could explain how any medieval craftsman had placed that image upon the cloth. The image lies not in any pigment, not in any paint or dye, but somehow within the very surface of the fibers themselves. Later researchers questioned the original carbon dating, pointing to possible contamination from the medieval fire and centuries of handling. The question of its age remains, even now, gently unresolved, held in a kind of patient suspension. When photographers first captured the cloth on glass plates in 1898, something unexpected appeared in the negative. The reversed image became a positive, and in that reversal the face grew clearer, more three-dimensional, almost present. Secondo Pia, the man who took those first photographs, described sitting alone in his darkroom watching the image slowly appear. He said he nearly dropped the plate in his hands, so moved was he by what he saw emerging from the chemical bath. That image has never quite let go of those who study it, drawing scientist and believer alike back to the same quiet cloth. Some have suggested the image was formed by a burst of radiation, or by a chemical reaction between burial herbs and linen. Others simply sit with the not knowing, finding something peaceful in a mystery that refuses to be easily closed. The cloth itself, if you were to stand near it, would seem almost unremarkable at first, pale and long and very still. Only gradually, as the eye adjusts to the faint sepia tones, does the form of a human being begin to quietly emerge. In the slow light of the chapel, surrounded by the faint smell of old stone and incense carried on cool air, it simply rests. Whatever it is, wherever it came from, it has outlasted every explanation offered for it, patient and unhurried as the stone that surrounds it. And so the linen lies in Turin, in the stillness it has always known, waiting with the calm of something that has already waited a very long time. Imagine drifting high above the earth, above the clouds and the slow curve of the Pacific, until far below a single island appears, small and quiet in an endless sea. Easter Island sits more than 2,000 miles from any other shore, one of the most remote places on the surface of this world. And yet, scattered across its rolling grasslands and coastal edges, nearly 900 enormous stone figures stand watching the horizon in patient silence. They are called moai, these figures, carved from the compressed ash of an ancient volcano, each one shaped with deliberate care by hands that worked without iron tools. Some stand as tall as a 3-story building, their elongated heads tilted slightly upward as though watching something just beyond the edge of sight. The grass around their bases is soft and green, worn smooth by centuries of wind that rolls in steadily from the open ocean. Standing among them, you might feel how utterly still the island becomes in the late afternoon, when the light turns low and amber and the sea goes quiet. The people who carved these figures called themselves Rapa Nui, and they built an entire civilization on this small volcanic island in the middle of the Pacific. How they arrived here, crossing thousands of miles of open ocean in wooden canoes guided only by stars and swells, remains one of the great quiet wonders of human history. They built their homes from stone, planted gardens in volcanic soil, and slowly, over many generations, began the immense task of carving their ancestors from the mountain itself. At the quarry called Reino Raraku, hundreds of figures were carved directly from the soft crater walls, their bodies emerging from the rock as if waking slowly from a long sleep. Some of them never left the quarry, still buried to their chests in the hillside, their lower bodies intact beneath the earth where no one expected them to be. Archaeologists who excavated the buried figures found the bodies covered in intricate carved symbols, hidden for centuries beneath the soil. The question that has lingered for as long as outsiders have known this island is simply this: how did they move them? The finished figures, some weighing as much as 80 tons, were transported from the quarry across miles of uneven volcanic terrain to platforms built along the coast. The Rapa Nui people themselves, when asked by early European visitors, said simply that the statues walked. That answer was set aside for a long time, but in recent years researchers began to consider that the figures may indeed have been rocked side to side and walked upright along the roads. The roads themselves are still there, those ancient paths connecting the quarry to the coast, and along their edges lie toppled and broken figures that did not complete the journey. Each moai was carved to represent a specific ancestor, someone important whose protective presence would watch over the community from the elevated platform where it finally stood. Many of the statues once wore cylindrical red stone hats called pukeo, quarried from a different part of the island and somehow lifted onto the heads of the finished figures. When the statues were still in use, their eyes were inlaid with white coral and obsidian, so that they seemed alive, gazing out across the island they protected. For a time, this civilization thrived here, and the island was home to thousands of people living in organized communities across the volcanic landscape. Then, slowly, something changed, and the carving stopped, and the statues that remained in the quarry were never finished and never moved. What exactly happened is still a matter of quiet debate among those who study the island, and the answers that have been offered feel incomplete, like the edge of something only half understood. Some of the figures were toppled, deliberately, during a period of internal conflict, and they lie now where they fell, facing the earth. And yet many still stand, restored now to their platforms, looking inland as their makers intended, quiet witnesses to whatever passed here long ago. At dawn the light comes from behind them, and their faces are in soft shadow while their stone backs catch the first pale colors of morning rising from the sea. The island is very still at that hour, just the breathing of the wind and the low sound of waves somewhere far below the cliffs. Visitors who come here often describe the same feeling, something between calm and reverence, a sense that these figures are holding some knowledge that no language has quite carried forward. The island holds hundreds of petroglyphs too, carved into the black lava rock along the shore, spirals and figures and forms that researchers have catalogued but not fully understood. There was also a written script here, called Rongorongo, found inscribed on wooden tablets, and it remains one of the very few undeciphered writing systems ever discovered. So the island keeps its own record, in stone and wood and the shapes of things carved by patient hands, in a language that still waits quietly to be understood. And the figures themselves stand on, as they always have, looking toward the interior of the island, toward the mountains and the old quarry and the roads that once carried them here. Whatever they were meant to guard, whatever presence they were meant to carry forward through time, they are still here, patient and unhurried, beneath the wide open sky of the Pacific. Somewhere in the English countryside, beneath open grass and quiet sky, lies Stonehenge, patient and still. The great stones you can see from the road are only part of what rests in this place. Beneath the soil, archaeologists found traces of a second ring of massive stones, buried and forgotten for thousands of years. It was not found by digging, but by listening, instruments pressed gently to the earth, reading what lay below. The buried ring sits just to the northeast of the standing stones, hidden beneath undisturbed chalk and ancient earth. Scholars believe these stones were once upright, perhaps arranged long before the circle most people know. At some quiet moment in prehistory, they were lowered into the earth, and the ground closed over them. No one recorded why they were moved, or by whom, or what ceremony may have surrounded that slow, careful work. The chalk beneath Salisbury Plain preserves things remarkably well. Impressions of stone sockets survive for millennia. Each buried socket is the shadow of a stone that once stood there, an absence shaped like presence. The ring appears to have been nearly as large as the outer Sarsen circle visible today. It may have curved around the northeast entrance, framing a corridor that aligned with the midsummer sunrise. That entrance was no accident. The whole monument was oriented with great care toward the turning of the year. The buried stones, whatever they were, would have stood at that same threshold, watching the same horizons. Some researchers suggest this outer ring was an early phase of the monument, predating much of what stands today. Others wonder if it was dismantled intentionally, its stones perhaps moved to other sites, repurposed across the landscape. The blue stones within Stonehenge were themselves carried over 200 miles from Wales. These people moved great weights. That slow, determined movement of stone across land was itself a kind of purpose, a reason beyond any single monument. The buried ring adds one more layer to a story that was already deeper than anyone had guessed. Around Stonehenge, the land is full of ancient features, barrows, ditches, avenues worn into the chalk by generations. The whole plateau was a sacred geography, tended and rebuilt over centuries, accumulating meaning like rings in old wood. The people who raised these stones left no written words, only the stones themselves, and the shapes beneath the ground. And so the buried ring rests quietly below, neither explained nor erased, patient in the chalk. Seasons pass over the plain, snow in winter, wildflowers in spring, the long slow heat of midsummer afternoons. Through each of those seasons, the buried stones remain exactly where they were laid, unmoving beneath the grass. Occasionally the instruments return, and archaeologists listen again to the ground, reading its long, slow memory. Each survey adds a little more to the picture, without ever quite completing it. The ring may connect to the avenue, or to the ditch, or to some alignment no longer readable from the surface. There is a gentleness in not knowing, in letting the earth hold its own counsel, undisturbed. The wind moves across the plain the way it always has, indifferent to centuries, unhurried as the stones themselves. Somewhere below, the buried ring waits in its chalk bed, exactly as it has for 3 or 4,000 years. No urgency surrounds it now. It has already outlasted so many questions, and will outlast many more. The plain grows quiet as the light softens, the stones holding their shapes against the fading sky. And beneath it all, in the still chalk, the buried ring rests on, slowly, slowly, through the long and quiet night. The hour has drifted a little later now, and somewhere far from the sea, the land grows very still. In the lowland jungles of Costa Rica, where the air is warm and heavy with the scent of wet earth, something was waiting. Workers clearing forest in the Diquis Delta in the 1930s began to find enormous stone spheres resting quietly in the earth. Some were small enough to hold in both hands, and some were as tall as a person standing upright. They were made of granodiorite, a stone found only in mountain ranges far away from where the spheres were discovered. The surface of each sphere had been ground and polished until it was nearly perfectly round, smooth to the touch. No one knows who carried them down from those distant mountains, or how they moved something so impossibly heavy through dense jungle. Dozens of the spheres were found at first, and then more, scattered across the delta in arrangements that no one could easily explain. Some seemed to be arranged in lines, others in clusters, as though they had been placed with great intention and care. The people who made them belonged to a civilization that left almost no other trace behind, no writing, no temples still standing. What they did leave were these quiet, perfectly round stones, resting in the earth as though simply placed there to be found. Researchers have wondered for many decades whether the spheres held a ceremonial meaning, or perhaps marked the homes of great chiefs. Some spheres were found arranged to point toward the rising sun at certain times of year, though no one can say this with certainty. The largest spheres weigh more than 15 tons, and yet their surfaces are almost perfectly spherical, within a fraction of a degree. To shape something so precise by hand, without modern instruments, suggests a patience and a skill that is difficult to fully imagine. The jungle around the delta is quiet in the early morning, the air soft, the birds beginning very slowly to call. It is easy to imagine standing in that stillness and feeling how ancient the land truly is beneath your feet. The stone spheres now rest in different places, some in museums, some still in the field where they were first uncovered. A handful remain on the island of Cano, sitting quietly near the shore where the land meets the slow blue water. The water there is clear and very still in the early afternoon, and the spheres look as though they have always belonged beside the sea. No one knows whether they were placed there intentionally or whether the landscape shifted around them over many centuries. The spheres have no inscriptions, no markings of any kind, only that smooth and enduring surface that the hands of the makers left. There is something very calming about an object that holds no words and asks nothing of you, only to rest and be near it. The Diquis people, as archaeologists call them, likely crafted these spheres between 1400 years ago and 500 years ago. That means they were already ancient when the first Europeans arrived and found them standing quietly in the cleared forest. Some early accounts describe workers accidentally damaging spheres in the belief that gold might be hidden inside them. The spheres were hollow in no way at all, just solid stone all the way through, patient and unhurried as the hills themselves. It is the kind of discovery that quiets the mind rather than exciting it, a slow realization of how much was made and then forgotten. The trees around the delta grow back quickly after clearing, and some spheres have been found almost entirely covered by roots and earth. The jungle is patient, and over the centuries it simply folded around the spheres and waited with them. A few of the spheres are listed now as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, recognized as something the world should not quietly lose. But most of what made them, the hands that shaped them, the songs perhaps sung while the stone was smoothed, is simply gone. What remains is the stone itself, round and whole, sitting in the warm afternoon light without any urgency at all. And somewhere in the delta tonight, those spheres are simply resting in the dark earth, as they have for a very long time. There is a kind of silence at Göbekli Tepe that settles over the limestone hills just before dawn, a stillness so old it seems to belong to the land itself. The wind moves through the shallow valleys of southeastern Turkey in long, unhurried sweeps, carrying nothing but the faint scent of dry earth and old stone. On a low ridge above the Harran Plain, a series of circles made from enormous T-shaped pillars stands as it has stood for more than 11,000 years. Each pillar was carved from the bedrock of the hill itself, lifted by hands whose names we will never know, and set in place with a care that still surprises those who study them. The pillars rise to the height of a tall tree, their broad flat tops like shoulders held calm and still against the open sky. On their surfaces, carved in low relief, move the shapes of animals, foxes slipping between the legs of cranes, scorpions curled beneath the bellies of aurochs, vultures spreading wide stone wings. The carvings are not crude or hurried, they are deliberate, layered, as though each creature was placed with some quiet intention the carvers held inside themselves. Nobody built a village here, nobody planted fields nearby. The people who raised these stones came to this hill for reasons that were not about survival. Beneath the surface of the hill, archaeologists have found layer after layer of filled-in enclosures, each one carefully buried and then built upon, again and again over centuries. The oldest enclosures reach back to a time before pottery, before farming, before any of the things we usually think of when we think of organized human life. And yet here was something organized, something planned across generations, carried forward by people who taught their children to keep returning to this hill. The central pillars in each enclosure are the tallest and most carefully finished, standing at the heart of the circle like presences that were meant to be faced. Some of these central pillars have arms carved along their sides, and belts carved at their middles, as though the stone itself was understood to be something more than stone. What that something more was, nobody can say with certainty, and the uncertainty itself has a kind of spaciousness to it, like a room whose walls you cannot quite find. The hilltop where all of this stands was known to local farmers for many years before excavations began. They called it the belly of the earth, and plowed carefully around it. When the first careful brushwork uncovered the curve of a buried pillar, the scale of what lay beneath the hill began to become slowly, quietly clear. The hill itself is not entirely natural, it has been shaped over millennia by the accumulated fill of enclosures that were retired and covered one by one. Far below the current surface, in the deepest and oldest layers, the stonework becomes finer still, as though the earliest builders were the most skilled of all. The carvings on those oldest pillars show a world of animals moving through an unseen landscape, not a landscape of the hilltop, but perhaps of something imagined or remembered. Vultures appear more than any other bird, their wings open, their posture unhurried, as though they are simply waiting for something that does not need to be named. Researchers have noted that certain animal groupings repeat across enclosures, as though the same vocabulary of images was being spoken again and again in slightly different voices. Nobody has counted enough enclosures yet. Geophysical surveys suggest that most of the site still lies unexcavated beneath the slope of the hill, quietly waiting. There is something restful about this, the idea that the greater part of this place remains sealed inside the earth, unhurried by our questions. The limestone from which the pillars were carved comes from a quarry just below the crest of the hill, and in that quarry an unfinished pillar still lies where it was abandoned. It is longer than any of the standing pillars, as though whoever was carving it imagined something larger than had ever been raised before, and then, at some point, stopped. We do not know why they stopped, the stone gives no answer, and the hill keeps its own counsel in the long dry afternoons. In the evenings, when the light turns amber and the shadows of the pillars stretch long across the sandy floor, the enclosures take on a different quality of stillness. It is the same stillness the builders must have known, the cooling air, the fading warmth of the stone under a palm pressed flat against it. Exactly why they built here, on this specific hill above this specific plain, is a question that opens quietly outward the more carefully you hold it. Some have suggested the hill's position allowed sight lines to certain stars, others have traced the animal carvings to seasonal constellations visible in that ancient sky. These ideas remain open and unresolved, neither confirmed nor dismissed, floating gently in the space between what is known and what can only be wondered at. What is certain is that for thousands of years, people returned here, carved new images, raised new circles, and buried the old ones with a kind of careful reverence. The place accumulated time the way a river accumulates silt, slowly, continuously, without any single moment you could point to and call the beginning or the end. And so the hill rests as it always has, above the plain, in the early morning quiet, holding everything it knows inside the cool weight of its limestone. Step back now, many quiet centuries, and find yourself somewhere along the banks of the Tigris River, in a land once called Mesopotamia. The year is somewhere around 250 BCE, and the city of Seleucia rises gently above the flat earth, its mud brick walls warm in the afternoon sun. It was here, in the soil outside that old city, that a small and unremarkable clay jar was found resting quietly, as if it had simply been waiting. The jar was no taller than a hand's length, smooth and rounded, sealed at its top with a stopper of asphalt, the ancient pitch of rivers. Inside the jar, preserved in the still dry air of the Iraqi earth, were two things that should not belong together in any ancient context. A copper cylinder, rolled carefully and fitted within the jar, and through its center, a slender iron rod, held apart from the copper by the asphalt seal. Wilhelm Koenig, a German archaeologist working in Baghdad in 1938, turned the object slowly in his hands and felt something he could not quite name. He had seen many things pulled from the earth of Iraq, but this small jar felt different, felt precise, felt intentional in a way that unsettled the familiar order of history. What Koenig wrote, quietly and carefully, was that the object resembled a galvanic cell, the kind used to generate electricity. He set the idea down gently in a publication, not loudly, not with great insistence, just an observation left open in the slow air of scholarship. The jar came from a place called Kujut Rabuay, a small village site near Baghdad, where the ground had once been part of a Parthian settlement. The Parthian Empire was not a civilization of mystery, it was vast, sophisticated, a crossing point of trade routes and ideas from Rome to China. And yet nowhere in the known records of that world, or any world of that age, was there written mention of electricity or of devices that might harness it. The jar simply existed, sitting now in the Iraq Museum in Baghdad, patient and silent and offering nothing by way of explanation. Some researchers, in later decades, filled similar jars with mild acidic liquids, grape juice, or vinegar, and found that a small current did indeed flow. It was faint, this current, less than 2 volts, barely enough to be felt, but enough to exist, which was itself a startling and quiet fact. Some wondered whether such jars might have been used in the gilding of jewelry, passing a faint charge through gold dissolved in solution onto base metals. Others thought the jars may have been used in a kind of acupuncture or ritual healing, the faint tingle of a current interpreted as something sacred. And others still suggested the whole comparison was a coincidence, a storage jar for scrolls, perhaps, or a container for something long since dissolved. No one has been able to say with certainty what the jar was made for, and the object keeps its silence with remarkable composure. There is something restful about that uncertainty, the way the jar asks nothing of us, only that we look at it and sit with what we do not know. Outside the museum in Baghdad, the Tigris moves slowly southward, the same river that once flowed past Seleucia and Kujut Rabuay 2,000 years ago. The river does not remember what it passed, only that it has been moving for a very long time, indifferent and calm and unhurried. The soil along those banks has held many things without telling anyone: seeds, coins, shards, jars, and perhaps knowledge we have not yet recovered. It is a gentle kind of humility to stand before such an object and admit that 2,000 years ago someone may have understood something we only rediscovered recently. Or perhaps not, perhaps the jar held only figs, or ink, or nothing at all, and the mystery lives entirely in the shape of the thing. Either way, the shape is unusual, the assembly is precise, and the coincidence is striking enough to hold the attention softly for a very long time. Let the Baghdad battery rest now in your mind the way it rests in its case, without urgency, without insistence, just quietly present. The night outside the museum is warm and still, and the air carries the old smell of the river, the same air that settled over Seleucia long ago. Somewhere beneath the earth not far from here, there are almost certainly more objects waiting, more jars, more questions sealed in clay. They have been resting there for 2,000 years without impatience, and they can rest a little longer while the world learns how to ask the right questions. The copper inside the clay does not corrode the way it should, as if something once flowed through it and left its trace behind, faint and unchanging. That trace is the softest kind of evidence, not proof, not certainty, just a whisper of possibility drifting down through the long corridors of time. And so the Baghdad battery remains what it has always been, a small clay jar, an open question, resting quietly in the warm soil of a very old world. The hour has drifted a little later now, and somewhere beneath the quiet of the night, a new story begins to surface. Far to the south, in the warm waters between Greece and the island of Crete, the Aegean Sea holds its ancient silence. The island of Antikythera rises there, small and unhurried, its rocky cliffs worn smooth by centuries of salt wind. More than 2,000 years ago, a ship came to rest on the seafloor near those cliffs, carrying something no one expected. In the year 1901, a group of sponge divers passed close to Antikythera and descended into the water to work. One of them surfaced with a strange report: the seafloor below was scattered with horses, and human hands, and the shapes of ancient things. Greek authorities arrived slowly, and over months, divers brought up bronze statues, marble figures, pottery, and glass, treasures from a Roman-era wreck. Among all of it, wrapped in corroded bronze, was a lump of something that no one paid much attention to at first. It sat quietly in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens for months before anyone looked at it closely. When it dried and began to fall apart, something inside revealed itself: gears, tiny and precise, cut from thin sheets of bronze. This is the Antikythera mechanism, and it is the oldest known complex mechanical device ever found anywhere on Earth. It dates to somewhere around 80 or 100 years before the Common Era, made during a time when such things were not supposed to exist. The device was made of at least 30 bronze gears, each one fitted to the next with extraordinary care, all enclosed in a wooden case. On its dials and discs, the movements of the sun and moon were tracked, the rising and setting of stars, the rhythm of the seasons. It could predict lunar and solar eclipses, following a cycle the ancient Babylonians had observed over many long generations. Turn its hand crank slowly and the gears would carry the heavens forward in time, or back, year by year, month by month. The craftsmanship inside is so fine that researchers who have studied it say it should not have been possible for its time. And yet there it is, resting now in a museum case, the gears still fitting together, the logic of it still intact. No other device of comparable complexity appears anywhere in the historical record for more than 1,000 years after it was made. Slowly, researchers have pieced together what it could do, reading the inscriptions on its surface and mapping the positions of its gears. The back of the device carries a spiral dial that tracks the 19-year cycle by which solar and lunar calendars slowly come back into alignment. There is also a smaller dial that may have tracked the 4-year cycle of the ancient Greek games, the rhythm of Olympic years. Who made it, and where, is a question the mechanism itself does not quite answer, though some signs point toward the island of Rhodes. Rhodes was home to great astronomers and engineers in that era, and the dialect of Greek on the inscriptions agrees with that possibility. Some researchers have suggested it may have connections to the work of Archimedes, though no proof has ever been confirmed. The ship that carried it went down near Antikythera, likely caught in a storm while sailing between the eastern Mediterranean and Rome. In time, the sea covered everything: the ship, the statues, the bronze instrument, and the water went quiet again above it. For 2,000 years it lay there undisturbed, while civilizations rose and faded on the shores above. When it was finally raised and studied, scientists found that no equivalent machine has ever been discovered from the ancient world. There are fragments still missing, pieces that broke away and drifted into the sand, and what they once showed remains unknown. Modern imaging has revealed new inscriptions on the surface, sentences about the planets, instructions for a cosmos rendered in gears. And still, the deeper question rests unanswered, not how it works, which we can now trace, but how anyone thought to build it at all. Somewhere in the ancient world, a mind looked at the sky and decided to hold it, gear by gear, cycle by cycle, inside a wooden box. And then the sea took it, and kept it, for a very long time, in the quiet dark below the waves. Somewhere far from the last story, a warm amber light falls across the sand of an ancient land, and the air holds the faint smell of dry earth baked slowly for centuries. This is Egypt, thousands of years ago, a civilization that carved time itself into stone and left its questions buried gently beneath the ground. In the necropolis of Saqqara, a burial site that stretches quietly across the plateau south of Cairo, a small wooden object was found among countless other artifacts. It was the year 1898, and a team of Egyptian archaeologists moved slowly and carefully through a tomb that had waited sealed for more than 2,000 years. Among the linen wrappings and sacred vessels, tucked beside objects meant to accompany the dead into the next world, lay a small carved piece of sycamore wood. The object was perhaps the length of a human hand, light and simple, shaped with a quiet elegance that seemed to serve some purpose not immediately obvious. It had a body like a bird, with outstretched wings and a tail that angled slightly, all carved from a single piece of wood by steady, knowing hands. For years it was stored quietly in the Cairo Museum, catalogued simply as a bird, resting in a drawer among many other small things recovered from the earth. Then in 1972, a scientist named Khalil Messiha was moving quietly through the museum collections and came across the little wooden shape, and paused. He held it gently, turned it over in his hands, and noticed something that stopped the usual movement of the room around him. The tail of this bird was vertical, not horizontal as a natural bird tail would be, rising straight up like the rudder of something meant to be guided through air. And the wings were not the rounded wings of a decorative bird, but swept back and slightly curved beneath, shaped in a way that felt purposeful and aerodynamic. Messiha was also a pilot, and he understood the quiet geometry of flight, and what he held in his hands matched that geometry in a way that seemed too deliberate to ignore. He brought the object to other scientists, and the question that passed between them, soft and unhurried, was this: could this small carved thing actually fly? Small replicas were made, matching the proportions of the ancient wood almost exactly, and held up gently and released into still air. And the replica glided, not crashing or tumbling but moving forward in a long slow arc, carrying itself through the air with quiet stability. The ancient Egyptians had carved something that, whether intentionally or not, obeyed the slow patient laws of lift and drag just as a modern aircraft does. What the object was made for, no one can say for certain, and that question drifts easily through the warm air of the museum without needing an answer tonight. Some have imagined it as a child's toy, released from a rooftop in the slow golden afternoon, drifting down toward the Nile while someone watched from below. Others have wondered whether it was a model, a small study of something larger that the ancient craftsman imagined or perhaps even attempted to build. There are carvings on some Egyptian walls that show birds with bodies like boats and wings held wide, and no one has ever fully settled what those images meant. What we know is that the sycamore wood itself is real, that the shape is real, and that the air does what the air always does when something shaped this way passes through it. The tomb where it was found was that of Pa-di-Iman, a name that translates gently into something like he who belongs to the hidden one. That tomb was built around 200 BC, meaning the little wooden bird rested in darkness for more than 2,000 years before a hand reached in and lifted it into the light. 2,000 years is a long time to rest quietly in one place, and the wood survived it well, still holding its shape, still holding its balance. Tonight, if you let your mind drift toward it, you might imagine the craftsman who made it, sitting in a workshop open to the Egyptian evening, shaping this curve by feel. His hands moved slowly along the grain of the wood, removing what was not needed, leaving what the shape asked to remain. When he finished, he held it up perhaps in the afternoon light, the way you might hold a small thing up to see it whole for the first time. Whether he released it into the air, whether it sailed outward over the warm sand, we do not know, and perhaps we do not need to know. The object has been studied and measured and debated, and still it rests in its case, holding its small shape, offering no final explanation. There is something restful in that, in a question that does not demand to be closed, that simply rests in the warm air of an old building alongside other quiet things. The plateau of Saqqara is still there, still stretching out under the Egyptian sun, and the sand shifts slowly over things we have not found yet. Other tombs still wait, sealed in their old patience, holding whatever they were given to hold, unaware of how many years have passed outside their walls. And somewhere in a museum drawer or a scholar's memory, the small wooden shape rests as it has always rested, balanced lightly on its own small mystery. Far across the world, many thousands of miles from where we have just been, a place waits quietly among ancient trees. Deep in the forests of Cambodia, where the air is warm and soft, the temple of Ta Prohm rests as it has for centuries. It was built long ago, in a time when the Khmer Empire stretched across much of the land we now call Southeast Asia. The Khmer kings built their temples not just as places of worship, but as reflections of the world they believed lay beyond this one. Ta Prohm was finished in the late 12th century, dedicated to the mother of a king who loved her enough to build her something eternal. For hundreds of years, thousands of people lived and prayed within its walls, tending the galleries, lighting the incense, singing the old songs. Then, slowly, the empire faded, and the people moved away, and the forest crept quietly back toward its old home. The trees grew at their own unhurried pace, sending roots down through the stones, not to break them, but simply to find the earth below. Silk cotton trees and strangler figs found the cracks in the towers and spread their arms slowly outward, season by quiet season. Over centuries, the roots and the stones have grown so tangled together that separating them now would bring both down. The two have reached a kind of agreement, the temple and the forest, holding each other up in a long and patient embrace. Somewhere deep inside the complex, a narrow passage leads between two walls that lean gently toward each other, held apart by nothing visible. Light falls into the galleries in soft, shifting angles, moving with the sun as it crosses the sky above the open courtyards. The stones themselves are a warm amber color in morning light, turning pale and cool by midday, then golden again toward evening. Carved into nearly every surface are the figures of apsaras, celestial dancers, their expression serene and unchanged after 800 years. Each apsara is slightly different, carved by a different hand, a different day, each one holding her own quiet stillness for eternity. The air inside the galleries is cool even in the heat of the day, carrying something old and earthy and quiet. Moss has laid itself along the lower stones in a gentle green, softening the edges the way time softens everything it touches. Some walls have tumbled slowly outward over the centuries and been left just where they fell, a peaceful kind of ruin. There are places in the complex where the canopy closes overhead and the temperature drops a few soft degrees, and the world feels very still. The sound in those places is different too, muffled and wrapped in leaves, with only distant birdsong threading through. Scholars have tried to count the towers and galleries and enclosures, but the temple keeps expanding gently the longer you look. There are chambers that open onto other chambers, corridors that turn and turn again, spaces that surprise you with sudden sky. The original inscriptions carved into the temple walls once described the lives of thousands of priests and dancers and servants within these walls. All those lives have passed, and the names have grown unfamiliar, but the stones they touched remain warm in the afternoon sun. The roots of the great trees press so softly against the stone that from a distance the temple looks almost held, cradled. There is one gateway where a single enormous root arches overhead like a vaulted ceiling made by the forest itself. Passing beneath it, you feel the weight of the tree above and the age of the stone below, and something between them, still and unhurried. The preservation of Ta Prohm was left intentionally close to how the jungle found it, a record of return rather than restoration. Other temples nearby were cleared and rebuilt, but this one was kept as a living record of how the world reclaims what it made. In the late afternoon, the light turns amber and the shadows of the roots fall long across the courtyard stones. The temple does not ask to be understood, only to be walked through slowly, the way the trees themselves have done for centuries. At the edges of the complex, the jungle thickens, and the carved stones disappear into roots and earth as if returning somewhere familiar. And somewhere in the stillness of the inner sanctum, the old stones rest in their patient quiet, holding what they know gently to themselves. From the quiet depths of water, we drift now toward ancient earth, toward bronze and silence buried beneath the soil of a forgotten valley. Somewhere in the southwest of what is now China, in a place called Sangsingdui, the land kept a secret for nearly 3,000 years. The Sangsingdui civilization flourished quietly along the banks of the Minjiang River, far from the great dynasties that history would come to remember. They left behind no written language, no maps, no names for themselves, only objects of astonishing beauty placed carefully into the earth. In 1986, workers digging near the town of Guanghan broke through the dry soil and found something that did not belong to any known world. Deep within two ritual pits, arranged with deliberate care, lay thousands of bronze and jade and gold objects unlike anything seen elsewhere in the ancient world. Among them, emerging slowly as the earth was brushed away, was a bronze mask of impossible scale and otherworldly stillness. The mask measured over 1.5 meters wide, its face broader than a man standing with arms outstretched, its features unlike any human face ever recorded. Its eyes projected outward from the face in long cylindrical columns, as if they were meant to see beyond the ordinary distances of the living world. No one knows what the eyes were meant to see, or what the face was meant to be, only that it was made with extraordinary care and skill. The bronze itself was worked to a thinness that puzzles metalworkers even today, its surface smooth and deliberately finished, not rough or improvised. Alongside the great mask, the pits held bronze trees taller than houses, their branches hung with fruit and birds of hammered metal. There were golden staffs, jade blades, and standing human figures with enormous hands, their long fingers reaching downward toward the earth. The figures wore elaborate robes cast in bronze, the fabric's texture preserved in the metal as if frozen in a single quiet afternoon long ago. Scholars have studied every artifact in careful silence, and they still cannot say with certainty who these people were or where their traditions came from. The Sangsingdui culture appears in the archaeological record fully formed, as if it arrived already knowing how to cast bronze and shape the extraordinary. Their style shares nothing recognizable with the Shang dynasty bronze work developing far to the east at the same time, in the same ancient country. Some researchers have suggested long trade routes, distant connections, influences traveling slowly across the ancient world like seeds carried on a quiet wind. Others sit with the simpler and more peaceful possibility that here, beside the Minjiang, a civilization simply dreamed its own dreams into bronze. The great bronze mask now rests behind glass in the Sanxingui Museum, its wide eyes still looking out across whatever distance they were always meant to see. Visitors sometimes stand very still before it, feeling something they cannot quite name, a kind of recognition without memory. In 2021, archaeologists returned to Sanxingui and opened 6 new pits, pulling from the earth hundreds more objects wrapped in the careful silence of millennia. Among the new finds were bronze figures half dragon and half human, their forms blending creatures from 2 different worlds into one seamless body. There were also golden face coverings placed over bronze heads as if the gold were a second skin, a layer of something precious over something sacred. All of these things had been placed into the pits deliberately, many of them burned first, as if returned to the earth through a slow and careful fire. No one knows what ceremony required this, what belief or grief or gratitude sent these irreplaceable objects back into the ground. The Sanxingui people vanished from the record sometime around 1000 BCE, leaving no obvious explanation, no war, no catastrophe clearly written in the earth. Their descendants, if there are any, do not know they are descended from the makers of the great bronze mask, that lineage quietly dissolved into time. And yet the objects remain, holding something of those people in their bronze, in the patient care of their making. The great mask looks out still, unhurried, its cylindrical eyes aimed at something beyond the glass and the quiet museum corridors. Whatever it was watching for 3,000 years ago, it seems in no hurry now, patient in the way that only very old things can be patient. Outside the museum, the fields of Sichuan stretch on as they always have, green and unhurried, the earth keeping whatever else it still holds. Somewhere beneath that quiet surface, perhaps, more objects wait in their careful arrangements, patient as the mask above them. And the valley rests, and the river moves slowly, and the great mask keeps its long, unhurried watch over all of it. The hour has drifted a little later now, and somewhere far to the north, the sky has settled into a pale and gentle gray. There, along the coastlines of ancient Scandinavia, the sea lies flat and quiet, barely breathing. Long ago, the Norse sailors set out across these waters without maps, without magnetic compasses, without any instrument we might recognize today. And yet they found their way, crossing open ocean to Iceland, to Greenland, to places the rest of the world did not yet know existed. For a long time, scholars wondered quietly how they managed it, especially when the sky was thick with cloud and the stars were hidden. Then, in an old Norse saga, a small detail surfaced, almost in passing, almost forgotten between other words. It spoke of a stone, a solarstein, a sunstone, that a Viking king used to find the sun when it could not be seen. The stone was described only briefly, without explanation, as though everyone at the time already understood what it was. And then the saga moved on, and the sunstone was mentioned no further, left sitting quietly in the middle of a very old story. For centuries the reference lay there undisturbed, until someone began to wonder whether it might be literally true. Iceland spar, a form of calcite crystal, grows in abundance across the volcanic landscape of Iceland, clear and pale as sea ice. When you hold a piece of it up and look through it, you see 2 images of whatever lies beyond, shifting very slightly against each other. This strange property, called double refraction, means the crystal bends light in 2 slightly different directions at once. And sunlight, even when scattered by thick cloud, carries a faint hidden pattern of polarization that moves with the sun's position. The 2 images inside the crystal grow equally bright at one precise angle, and that angle always points toward the hidden sun. So a navigator, rotating the crystal slowly against a gray sky, could find the sun without ever seeing it. It is a quiet kind of precision, gentle and unhurried, the way the stone reads the sky without asking anything of it. Then, in a shipwreck off the coast of Alderney in England, something unexpected was found among the sunken cargo. A small rectangular block of Iceland spar crystal, slightly worn, lying among navigational instruments from a 16th century vessel. The ship had gone down around 1590, and the crystal had stayed there, waiting, for over 400 years. It was not labeled, not explained, just present, tucked among the tools a navigator would have reached for at sea. There is something slow and steady about the idea of a sailor lifting a pale stone toward a hidden sun, trusting what the crystal sees. The sea stretches away in every direction, gray and seamless, and the horizon fades into cloud without a clear line. Somewhere beneath that overcast, the sun is moving, tracing its arc in silence, invisible but still present. And the crystal, held steady in a careful hand, catches something of that movement, a brightness that shifts and settles. What remains quietly remarkable is that no written instructions for using the sunstone have ever been found. The knowledge of how to use it seems to have passed from hand to hand, from sailor to sailor, without being written down. And so when the tradition faded, as traditions do, it left only a single sentence in a saga, and a crystal in a wreck. We can test the crystal now, and we can confirm that the physics works exactly as it would need to. And yet the full picture of how those sailors used it, how they learned, how they passed the knowledge on, stays just out of reach. Somewhere between the crystal and the cloud and the hidden sun, there is a kind of knowing that did not survive in words. The stone itself is still here, in a conservation collection, cool and clear and patient, as it has always been. Outside, the sky goes on being the same sky the Norse sailors watched, gray and full of hidden light. And somewhere in that stillness, the answer to how they did it drifts quietly on, unwritten, unhurried, not yet found. Somewhere far from the sea, a cold autumn mist drifts slowly across the hills of Central Europe, settling gently over stone and silence. In that quiet world, somewhere in the early 1500s, a small and very strange book was made by hands we will never know. The book is called the Voynich manuscript, and it rests today behind glass in a library at Yale University, waiting patiently. Its pages are made of thick, soft vellum, the kind that whispers faintly when you turn it, pale as cream and cool to the touch. Across every page flows a script that no one, in over 5 centuries of looking, has ever been able to read. The letters are rounded and flowing, like a language someone learned in a dream and wrote down before waking. Alongside the words, there are drawings, rendered in soft faded colors, of plants that belong to no known garden on earth. Their roots curl in unusual ways, their leaves are shaped like nothing in any herbalist's catalog, ancient or modern. Some pages show small human figures, pale and rounded, resting in pools or channels filled with some kind of flowing substance. Other pages show circular diagrams, like maps of something, or charts of something, turning slowly inward on themselves. There is a section that resembles the night sky, with stars and symbols arranged in careful, deliberate patterns across the vellum. Carbon dating has placed the vellum itself in the early 1400s, making the physical book at least 600 years old. It first appeared in recorded history in the court of Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, who paid a great deal of gold for it. Rudolph believed it was the work of the philosopher Roger Bacon, a man of strange and wondrous knowledge from centuries before. From Rudolph's court the manuscript passed slowly through many hands, each owner as baffled as the last, across the long centuries. In 1912, a book dealer named Wilfred Voynich found it in a chest in an Italian castle and brought it quietly into the modern world. He gave the book his name, and that is how it has been known ever since, though its true author remains completely unnamed. Some of the greatest codebreakers in history have turned their full attention to it, and every single one has walked away without an answer. During the Second World War, American military cryptanalysts who had broken the codes of nations spent months on it and found nothing. The text, whatever it says, follows statistical patterns that suggest real language, with rhythms and repetitions that feel like meaning. Yet that meaning, like something glimpsed through water, has never quite come clear, no matter how long or how carefully one looks. One theory holds that it is a constructed language, invented whole and complete by a single brilliant and solitary mind. Another suggests it may be an encrypted form of something real, a hidden text wrapped in layer after careful layer of concealment. Some have proposed it is simply an elaborate, sustained hoax, a beautiful object made to deceive and to enchant and to perplex. But something in the patience of it, in the thousands of careful marks made across 240 pages, resists that explanation. Someone sat for a very long time and made this thing, line after line, day after day, in some quiet room we cannot find. The plants in its pages have been compared to every flora in the known medieval world, and none of them match precisely. They look almost like something real, almost like a memory of a real place, but just slightly, gently wrong in every leaf and stem. The circular diagrams may be maps of the sky, or maps of the body, or maps of something that has no name in any language. And the small pale figures in their pools rest there still, as they have rested for 600 years, unhurried and unexplained. The manuscript sits in its case at Yale, and the pages do not change, and the script does not yield, and the quiet around it deepens. Perhaps somewhere the key exists, folded inside some other document, waiting in some other chest in some other forgotten room. Or perhaps the meaning was always meant to remain just out of reach, like something half-remembered from a very old and gentle dream. For now the book rests, and the autumn mist drifts on across the hills, and somewhere a quill was set down long ago and never picked up again. Somewhere far from the cool northern shores we just left, the air grows warmer, drier, carried on a slow desert wind across the high plateau of southern Peru. This is the Nazca Desert, one of the driest places on Earth, where the sun has bleached the ground to a soft, pale ochre for thousands of years. Across this silent plateau, etched gently into the earth, lie some of the most quietly astonishing markings ever made by human hands. They are called the Nazca Lines, and they have rested here, in this still and windless desert, for somewhere between 1500 and 2000 years. The lines were made simply, by removing the dark reddish-brown stones from the surface and revealing the lighter, cream-colored earth beneath. Because this desert almost never receives rain, and because the wind here carries very little sand, those shallow channels have remained almost perfectly preserved. Some lines run perfectly straight for kilometers, stretching across the plateau as if drawn by a quiet, patient hand that never wavered. Others spread into wide triangles and trapezoids, long flat clearings that seem almost like landing fields for something very slow and very gentle. And then there are the figures, drawn in single unbroken lines that never cross themselves, tracing the shapes of animals and birds with extraordinary calm precision. A hummingbird with outstretched wings, a spider no bigger in real life than a fingernail but here drawn large enough to be seen from the sky. A condor, wings fully spread, as if caught in a single moment of slow and effortless flight above the plateau. A monkey with a curling spiral tail, sitting quietly in the middle of the desert as it has sat for nearly 2 millennia. The people who made these figures were the Nazca culture, who lived here in the river valleys at the edge of this plateau from roughly the 1st century through the 7th. They built aqueducts underground, channeling water from the distant Andes through the desert, some of which still flow quietly today. They made fine pottery painted with rich colors, and they wove cloth with extraordinary intricacy, and then one day they began to draw on the desert floor. No one knows exactly when the first line was drawn, or who drew it, or what was said as the stones were quietly moved aside to reveal the pale earth beneath. What we do know is that the lines could not have been made by a single person in a single season, but required many hands working together over many years. And yet, from the ground, the figures are almost impossible to see as figures. They are simply channels in the earth, a few centimeters deep, wandering away from you. It is only when you rise above the plateau, lifted gently into the warm air, that the shapes slowly reveal themselves in their full, quiet enormity. This has puzzled people for a very long time, the question of why something so immense was made to be seen only from above. Some have suggested they were made for the gods, who were imagined to look down from the mountains and the sky onto the world below. Others have noticed that certain lines point toward where the sun rises or sets on particular days of the year, as if the desert itself were a kind of soft calendar. And there are those who believe the lines may have been connected to water, to the rare rains that sometimes fell, and to prayers for that water to return. The truth is that no single explanation has ever satisfied everyone, and the lines remain as quiet and open as the desert itself. What is certain is that the people who made them did so with great care, using simple tools, wooden stakes, string, and the patience of the desert itself. The straight lines are so nearly perfect that modern surveyors who have measured them find almost no deviation across kilometers of open ground. The figures, too, are geometrically consistent, their curves smooth, their proportions carefully kept through forms that no one walking them could ever have seen whole. There is a kind of quiet wonder in that, in the idea of a person kneeling in the dust, moving stones, trusting that somewhere above, the shape was becoming whole. The Nazca Plateau has a stillness that is difficult to describe, no trees, almost no wind, a silence that has held these shapes across 15 centuries. Even now, if you stand at the edge of the plateau as the afternoon softens toward evening, the air is warm and completely still. The lines stretch away from you in every direction, going somewhere unhurried, going nowhere in particular, going wherever they were always going. And the figures rest in the earth as they have always rested, the bird mid-wing, the spider mid-step, the monkey with its curling tail simply there. Whatever they meant to the hands that made them, they have outlasted the knowing, and the desert holds them gently, without any urgency to explain. And so the plateau drifts slowly into the evening quiet, the pale earth cooling just a little, the lines still there, patient as they have always been. Somewhere beneath the surface of the sea, stone gives way to silence, and the world above simply disappears. Off the southern tip of Japan, where the East China Sea meets warmer currents, lies a small island called Yonaguni. The island itself is quiet, a place of fishing boats and slow mornings, where the wind moves steadily off the water. In the winter months, the currents here draw hammerhead sharks close to the island, and divers began following them down. It was in 1986 that a diver named Kihachiro Aratake drifted a little further along the southern coast than usual. Below him, as the water cleared, something enormous and angular rose from the seafloor. There were flat terraces, broad and level, stacked one upon another like the steps of some great forgotten building. The stone was dark with age, but the shapes were unmistakable, sharp corners, level surfaces, and edges that ran in long straight lines. Word spread slowly among the diving community, and in the months that followed, others came to see what Aratake had found. The structure extends roughly 60 meters from end to end, and rises nearly as tall as a 5-story building from the seafloor. What struck early visitors most was not simply its size, but its extraordinary stillness beneath the moving water. Divers would drift along its broad upper platform, feeling the gentle current pass over stone that had not been touched in a very long time. There are what appear to be pathways running along the sides of the structure, worn smooth and clearly defined. One section holds what looks like a rounded hollow in the stone, almost like a basin, carefully shaped. Elsewhere there are twin upright pillars of stone standing close together, as if framing something that once stood between them. A triangular outcrop rises from one corner of the structure, pointing upward toward the light filtering through the water above. Masaaki Kimura, a marine geologist from the University of the Ryukyus, spent years diving the site and mapping every feature by hand. He believed what lay beneath the water had once stood in open air, a place where people gathered, long before the sea rose to cover it. The ocean levels here were once much lower, and the land that now lies submerged would have been dry ground perhaps 10,000 years ago. If the structure was shaped by human hands, it would place people here working in stone at a time before any known civilization in the region. Other geologists looked at the same stone and saw something different, the natural fracturing of sandstone under pressure over vast spans of time. Sandstone does sometimes break in flat planes and right angles, they noted, forming shapes that can seem almost deliberate. And yet the question remains, because the features here seem to repeat and align in ways that natural fracturing alone rarely produces. The site has been studied, measured, and debated for 4 decades now, and no agreement has ever quietly settled over it. Divers who visit say that what strikes them most is a feeling of being somewhere very old, somewhere that existed long before memory. The stone is covered in places with a thin layer of soft growth, coral beginning to make a home of whatever this once was. Small fish drift through the passages between the stone walls, unhurried, turning slowly in the gentle current. From the upper terrace, looking upward, the surface of the sea is a soft, shifting ceiling of light. And below, the structure descends into deeper water, its lower reaches fading gradually into a blue-green stillness. Whatever the origin of this place, the sea has held it for thousands of years, and shows no sign of giving up its answer. The current moves across it softly, as it has moved across it for longer than any story we know how to tell. And the stone remains, patient and enormous, resting on the seafloor in the way that only very old things can rest. Far above, the island of Yonaguni sits quietly in the afternoon light, the sea around it smooth and unhurried. And somewhere beneath all that stillness, the stone terraces wait in the blue-green quiet, as they have always waited. A soft mist rolls in from the River Boyne tonight, settling low across the Irish countryside like a quiet breath. Somewhere in County Meath, Ireland, a great mound of earth rises gently from the meadows, ancient and unhurried. It has been standing here for more than 5,000 years, older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids of Egypt. The mound is ringed at its base by great curbstones, each one enormous, each one carried here from distant riverbeds long ago. People who built this place left no written language, no name for themselves, only these immense and careful stones. At the entrance, a single large stone lies flat, covered in spirals that curl slowly into themselves, patient and deep. Above the entrance there is a small rectangular opening in the stone, called a roof box, barely wide enough to notice. For most of the year that opening does nothing visible, sitting quietly in the stone while seasons pass overhead. But on the morning of the winter solstice, something very slow and very deliberate begins to happen just before dawn. The sun rises at its southernmost point on the horizon, and its first light finds the roof box exactly, as if remembered. A thin ribbon of golden light enters the roof box and travels down the long inner passage, stone wall by stone wall. The passage is 19 meters long, and the light reaches the very end of it, touching the stone floor of the inner chamber. For 17 minutes, the chamber glows with this quiet winter light, and then the sun moves on and the room returns to stillness. It has done this every single winter solstice for 5,000 years, through wars and forgetting and the long silence of centuries. The builders aligned the whole enormous structure to that one moment, calculating the angle of the sun with no instruments we know of. No one can say with certainty how they measured it, or how many seasons they watched before they drove the first stone into the earth. Inside the passage, the walls are lined with slabs of stone that were quarried far away and brought here across difficult terrain. Some of those stones carry carved spirals and lozenges and chevrons, shapes repeated with slow patience across their gray surfaces. At the end of the passage, 3 smaller chambers open outward like a cross, each one holding a shallow stone basin. Those basins once held cremated human remains, placed there with care, resting at the very heart of the mound. The people buried here were important to their community in some way that we can only imagine now, quietly, from a great distance. Outside the mound, a circle of standing stone surrounds it at a distance, placed there perhaps centuries after the tomb itself. The whole site sits within a bend of the River Boyne, a gentle curve of water that has held this place in its arms for millennia. The name Newgrange itself came much later, given by farmers who worked the land above, not knowing what lay quietly beneath. For thousands of years the mound was simply a hill to those who passed it, its inner passage sealed and forgotten beneath the grass. It was only in the late 17th century that someone first noticed the entrance stone, and stepped inside for the first time in ages. What they found inside was a passage still perfectly intact, the stones fitted together without mortar, holding their shape through all the long centuries. The corbelled ceiling of the inner chamber rises above the stone basins, and it has not let in a single drop of rainwater in 5,000 years. That alone is a kind of quiet miracle, the building of something so carefully watertight without any technology we might recognize. And so the mound holds its stillness, year after year, while the fields outside soften with each passing Irish season. Each December the sun returns to its ancient angle, and the light finds the roof box again, as it always has, slowly. The ribbon of light moves down the passage floor in those early morning minutes, unhurried, touching the same stones it has always touched. And then it fades, as it always fades, and the chamber settles back into its gentle and ancient quiet. The mound does not explain itself, and perhaps that is enough, to simply rest here in the soft Irish mist, and let the river carry the hours away. Slowly, let us step back 2,000 years, and find ourselves standing at the edge of an ancient plain in central China. Somewhere beneath the dry yellow earth of that plain, a silence had been kept for more than 20 centuries. This is the site of the Terracotta Army, buried alongside the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang, in his vast and carefully ordered tomb complex. Most people know of the great pits, filled row upon row with thousands of clay soldiers standing in quiet formation. But far to one side of those grand galleries, partly forgotten beneath undisturbed layers of soil, lies a place called Pit 7. Pit 7 is smaller than the famous pits, quieter, and it holds within it something that no one has yet been able to fully explain. When excavators first opened the ground here, they found not soldiers, not weapons, but fragments of something altogether different. The pit contained the remains of clay figures unlike any found elsewhere in the vast tomb complex. These were not warriors posed in rigid columns, but figures whose posture suggested something softer, something more difficult to name. Archaeologists moved slowly through the layers, brushing soil aside with great care, watching for any detail that might offer understanding. The earth here had a particular stillness to it, the kind that comes when something has rested undisturbed for a very long time. Some of the figures in Pit 7 appeared to wear robes rather than armor, which set them apart from anything in the other chambers. Their hands, where intact, were positioned not in the grip of weapons but in gestures that suggested ceremony, or perhaps attendance. The question that settled over the site was a gentle one: who were these figures meant to be, and what were they doing here? Some scholars have suggested they may represent officials of the imperial court, attendants who served the emperor in life and were meant to serve him still. Others have proposed that the figures could represent entertainers, acrobats, or performers who brought music and movement to the emperor's court. There is something quietly extraordinary in imagining that an emperor saw fit to bring not only his army but also his musicians into eternity with him. The pit itself is relatively compact, its walls of packed yellow earth rising on all sides in a quiet, enclosed space. Standing above it now, looking down through the protection of a modern roof, one can feel how carefully this space was arranged. The figures were not simply placed at random but positioned with an intention that still reads across the centuries, even if its full meaning remains just beyond reach. In time, researchers began to notice that certain figures in Pit 7 bore traces of pigment, faint remnants of the vivid colors they once wore. Red and green and traces of black still clung in small patches to the clay, suggesting that in its original state this place was far from gray. The ancient craftsmen who made these figures worked with extraordinary attention to detail, each face subtly different from the last. Somewhere in the records of that long dynasty, names were written for each of these clay figures, purposes assigned, rituals imagined. But those records are gone now, or have not yet been found, and so Pit 7 holds its arrangement in a quiet, patient silence. The mausoleum complex itself is vast, a landscape of low-mounded earth stretching across the plain, most of it still unexcavated. Beneath those gentle hills, an entire underground world waits in the same stillness it has kept for more than 2,000 years. And Pit 7 is simply one small room in that enormous, mostly hidden palace that was built to last forever. The figures resting there were never meant to be seen again, not by living eyes, but only to exist quietly in that sealed underground space. There is a kind of tenderness in that thought, that someone long ago arranged these figures with such care for a world no one would ever visit. Now, slowly, the earth continues to give them up, one careful season of excavation at a time, without hurry. And what they were truly meant to represent, what ceremony they were part of, drifts softly out of reach, like a word forgotten just before sleep. The plain stretches on around the mausoleum in every direction, calm and unhurried under the wide sky of Shangxi. And somewhere beneath it all, in a small pit that few people think to ask about, the terracotta figures of Pit 7 rest, still and unhurried, in the long quiet of the earth. A pale desert light settles slowly over the land, soft and still, the color of old parchment left in the sun. Somewhere in that quiet, the hills of Qumran rise gently from the earth, ancient and unhurried, watching over the valley below. In the year 1952, a group of archaeologists moved carefully through a narrow cave in those hills, their footsteps slow on the dry stone floor. What they found there was unlike anything the other caves had given them, not papyrus, not parchment, but metal, thin and green with age. It was a scroll, but it had been hammered from copper, and it lay folded and brittle on the cave floor, as though it had simply been waiting. The scroll was too fragile to unroll, and for 3 years it sat in a laboratory in Jordan, patient and unread. When scholars finally cut it into strips to read it, they found columns of careful Hebrew writing, line after line, steady and precise. And what was written there was not scripture, not poetry, not prophecy, it was a list of places, and buried things, and impossible amounts of gold. 64 locations were named, each described with quiet precision, a cistern here, a courtyard there, a depth in the earth, a weight of silver. The total treasure described, if one were to add it all together, would amount to something in the region of dozens of tons of gold and silver. Scholars sat with those numbers and read them again, slowly, because they did not seem possible for any single community to have possessed. Some believed the treasure had belonged to the great temple in Jerusalem, hidden away before the Roman armies arrived in the year 70. Others thought the scroll described wealth gathered by a desert community, stored carefully across the wilderness against a time of need. And a few scholars, reading those same words, wondered quietly whether the numbers were ever meant to be taken literally at all. The writing itself is different from every other Dead Sea Scroll, plainer, more practical, the handwriting of someone recording real things, not sacred ones. There are small directional details that feel unmistakably real. Turn at the dry wadi, go east, count 40 cubits, look beneath the steps. Expeditions have gone out into those hills carrying the scroll's directions, moving slowly through the heat, following what clues remain. They have found ruins that match some descriptions, an old cistern, a courtyard, a threshold of worn stone, but nothing beneath them. The land has been worked and built upon and left and returned to across 2,000 years, and much that was once there is simply gone. Some of the place names in the scroll no longer correspond to anything that can be found, they belong to a map that the landscape no longer matches. There is a place named the Valley of Acre, and a cave with a single opening facing east, and archaeologists have searched, and walked away quietly. One of the most curious details is a second scroll, mentioned inside the copper scroll itself, which is said to explain the hiding places more fully. That second scroll has never been found, and its existence is known only because the copper scroll refers to it, quietly, in passing. The copper scroll itself now rests in a museum in Amman, Jordan, behind glass, in a room that is calm and cool and very quiet. Visitors stand before it and look at the green corroded surface and the neat rows of letters, and most of them do not speak. There is something in the object itself that quiets a room, the sense of a message written with great care, intended to be found. Whether the treasure was ever truly there, whether it was carried away, whether it was always something other than gold, none of this is settled. The scroll does not explain itself, does not offer a reason for its existence, does not say who wrote it or why it was left in that cave. It simply lists, and ends, and the last entry trails off with no conclusion, as though whoever was writing was interrupted, or simply finished. The hills of Qumran hold the afternoon light softly, their caves open to the sky above the Dead Sea, as they have for a very long time. The water of the Dead Sea below is very still, the color of pale blue glass, and the far shore fades softly into the haze. Somewhere beneath those hills, or beneath the old stones of Jerusalem, or beneath a dry wadi floor, something may still be waiting in the earth. Or perhaps the value of the scroll is not in what it points to, but in the fact that someone, long ago, took the trouble to write it down. And so the copper scroll rests in its quiet room in Amman, patient as the desert itself, neither explaining nor concealing, simply there. A quiet mist settles over the creek beds of Texas, drifting low through the cedar and limestone hills as if the land itself is breathing slowly. In a small town called London, in Kimball County, the Llano River moves gently over ancient stone, unhurried and clear. The rock here is very old, laid down long before any human hand touched it, patient and still beneath centuries of weather. Sometime in 1936, a couple walking along a creek near London noticed something unusual partly embedded in a loose rock shelf near the water. What they saw, half swallowed by the surrounding rock, was the wooden handle and iron head of what appeared to be an old hammer. They called it the London artifact, and in time it became known simply as the London hammer, resting quietly inside its stone. The hammer was removed eventually, still partially encased in a thick nodule of limestone that had grown or formed tightly around it. The iron head was about 6 inches long, and the wooden handle, though ancient-looking, had not fully petrified, still holding a quiet solidity. The limestone surrounding it, geologists would later observe, appeared to be from the Cretaceous period, more than 100 million years old. And so the quiet question arose, not urgently, but slowly, like something surfacing through still water: how did a hammer end up inside such ancient stone? The family kept the artifact for years, displaying it in their home, letting visitors hold it and turn it over in wondering hands. In time the hammer passed to a small museum in Glen Rose, Texas, where it can still be seen today, resting calmly behind glass. Glen Rose itself is a quiet place beside the Paluxy River, surrounded by hills where the rock holds old things very close. The iron of the hammerhead showed an unusually high purity, with very little of the sulfur and other elements common in modern smelted iron. Some who examined it felt this purity suggested a very different, older process of creation, one not easily placed in any known timeline. The wooden handle, rather than decaying entirely, had begun to turn to coal at one end, a process called coalification that takes a very long time. Coalification does not happen quickly, it is the work of pressure and deep time, the slow patience of the earth rearranging what it holds. And yet the rock encasing the hammer, the limestone concretion, can also form relatively quickly around an object given the right mineral-rich water. Water carrying dissolved calcium carbonate can slowly crystallize around almost anything left undisturbed in a creek or spring for long enough. So the concretion itself does not tell us with certainty how old the hammer is, only that the rock held it long enough to surround it completely. The hammer's design, those who studied it noted, resembled tools used by miners and quarry workers in 19th-century America. But no clear maker's mark, no foundry stamp, no identifying detail has ever been found on it that places it firmly in any era or place. It rests in that uncertain space between the explainable and the simply unknown, neither confirmed ancient nor fully accounted for as modern. The creek where it was found still runs today, clear and unhurried, carrying grains of limestone downstream the way it always has. The hills around London, Texas remain quiet through most seasons, the cedar bending slightly in the wind, the stone beneath unchanged. Somewhere in those hills, more rock holds more time, layer on layer, each one a slow record of what the land was before anyone was watching. The hammer sits in its glass case in Glen Rose, and visitors come and go, and the stone around its handle does not change at all. Some things resist the need to be explained, sitting quietly at the edge of what we know, patient as old limestone waiting in a creek. The iron has not corroded as expected for its apparent age, its surface holding a kind of calm density that no test has fully accounted for. Whatever placed it there, time or hand or accident, the Llano River keeps moving past that same stretch of bank, indifferent and clear. The stone remembers nothing of what it holds, only that it holds it, the way old rock always does, without explanation or apology. And the hammer waits, as it has waited, settled into its surrounding stone with the same quiet patience the earth shows everything it keeps. The mist over those Texas creek beds thins slowly toward mid-morning, and the limestone brightens, and the water moves on without a sound. Somewhere beneath the surface of those calm hills, the story of the hammer remains open, unhurried, held gently in place by ancient stone. Somewhere in the ancient highlands of Ethiopia, a quiet story has rested for centuries, patient and unhurried. It is the story of the Ark of the Covenant, and where it may have come to rest at last. Aksum is a small city now, quiet streets lined with old stone, obelisks rising slowly from the red earth. For centuries, pilgrims have walked softly along its dusty paths toward a small chapel near the center of the old city. The chapel is called the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion, and it stands low and still among older ruins. Inside, it is said, the original Ark of the Covenant has been kept, resting in a room no ordinary person may enter. A single guardian, chosen for life, is the only one who may come close to what is kept there. He lives beside the Treasury Chapel, spending his days in quiet devotion, never leaving its grounds. The Ark, by the oldest traditions of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, was brought here long ago from Jerusalem. The story goes that Menelik, son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, carried it southward across the desert. He brought it across the Red Sea and into the highlands, where it has remained, slowly, ever since. The Kabra Nagast, an old Ethiopian manuscript, tells this journey in long and careful verses. Its pages hold the names of kings and the weight of sacred objects carried across a very old world. Slowly, the account traces the ark's path away from the temple in Jerusalem, across lands that no longer carry those names. In Aksum, this story is not legend but living truth, woven into the fabric of daily prayer and ceremony. Each year, the city celebrates Timkat, the festival of the Epiphany, and a replica of the ark is carried through the streets. The replica is wrapped in cloth, carried carefully on the heads of white-robed priests moving through the old quarter. And somewhere beyond the celebration, past the gates of the inner chapel, the original is said to wait in stillness. No camera has ever photographed it, no independent scholar has ever been permitted to see it. What lies inside the small treasury building remains entirely beyond the reach of outside eyes. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church holds this not as uncertainty but as settled sacred truth, carried forward without question. Archaeologists have studied the site carefully, walking the old grounds, tracing the foundations of even older churches beneath. Beneath the current churches, older walls have been found, layer upon layer of sacred buildings stretching back very far. Some researchers believe that even if the ark itself is not there, something profoundly old and sacred has always been kept in this place. The air around the compound is unhurried, the light in the morning soft and very still. The obelisks nearby, some toppled, some still standing, mark a civilization that once reached across these highlands with great quiet power. In the 4th century, the kingdom of Aksum converted to Christianity, and the church became the center of everything. The oldest church on this exact site may have been built not long after that conversion, raising its walls near whatever was already being kept here. The centuries passed gently over Aksum, empires rose and quieted, and still the small chapel remained. Even when armies came, even when the old trade routes fell silent, this place continued its devotion without interruption. There is something in the constancy of this place that settles quietly in the mind, neither solved nor troubled. Perhaps what matters most is not whether the ark remains there, but that for so long, so many believed it to be so. And so the small chapel stands in the highland air, holding whatever it holds, quietly and without explanation. The guardian stays close, the old obelisks lean slightly in the earth, and the highland winds pass through without hurry. Far across the continent, many hundreds of miles from wherever your mind has just been resting, something small and very old waits quietly in a museum drawer. It is a bronze object, roughly the size of a closed fist, and it has 12 flat faces arranged around a hollow center. Each face is a perfect pentagon, and at the center of each pentagon there is a circular hole, no two holes quite the same size. At each of the 12 corners where the faces meet, a small round knob protrudes outward, smooth and carefully cast. These objects have been found across a broad stretch of northwestern Europe, from Britain to Hungary, quietly turning up in fields and riverbeds over many centuries. Farmers have plowed them up from the earth, children have discovered them near old roads, and scholars have catalogued more than 100 of them now. Every single one is made of bronze, and every single one has that same hollow 12-sided shape with its knobs and its mismatched holes. What no one has ever been able to say with certainty is what they were actually for. There are no written records from the Roman world that mention them, not one inscription, not one passage in any surviving text. Imagine setting down a bronze object so carefully made, so deliberately shaped, and leaving no word at all about its purpose. Some scholars have suggested they were candle holders, the wax fitted through those circular holes to stand upright inside. Others have proposed they were surveying instruments, used to measure distances across fields or to calculate the angle of artillery. There is a quiet appeal to that idea, the Roman engineer holding this small bronze form up toward a distant tree lean, one eye closed. But the holes are too irregular for any precise measurement, and no two dodecahedra are identical, which makes a standardized tool unlikely. Still other researchers have thought they might be dice, or gaming pieces, used in some leisure activity we no longer remember. The Roman world was full of games, and the legions carried entertainments with them across every province they settled. Slowly, the idea of a ritual object has also gathered interest, something used in ceremonies or kept as a talisman against misfortune. A few dodecahedra have been found alongside coins and jewelry, as though they were treasured and kept close. One was discovered inside a small chest, as if it had been packed away with care before some journey that was never completed. You can hold the shape of that moment very gently, someone closing a lid, someone setting the chest down, and then the long quiet of centuries. The dodecahedron itself is a shape with a long history in human thought, one of only 5 perfectly regular solid forms that geometry allows. The ancient Greeks considered it almost sacred, a form so pure and complete that it seemed to belong to something beyond ordinary matter. Whether the Roman craftsmen who cast these objects shared that reverence, or simply found the form beautiful, is something we cannot know. What we do know is that they were made with considerable skill, the casting clean, the knobs smoothly finished, the holes neatly bored. Someone spent real time on these, someone who knew metal and fire and the patience required to make a hollow thing hold its shape. They are found mostly in the northern provinces, in Gaul and along the Rhine and into Britain, almost never in Rome or the warmer south. That northern distribution has led some to wonder whether the object belonged to a local tradition, something regional and perhaps pre-Roman. Or perhaps the cold provinces simply required something the warmer lands did not, though what that might be remains entirely open. Every explanation that has been offered eventually runs into some quiet difficulty, some reason it does not quite fit all the evidence. And so the dodecahedra sit in their museum cases, patient and unhurried, as comfortable with the question as with any answer. There is something restful in that, an object that has outlasted every explanation offered for it, still perfectly intact. Somewhere tonight, one of them rests behind glass in a quiet gallery, the lights low, the building still around it. Its bronze has turned the soft greenish color that only centuries of slow change can produce, a color that belongs to deep time. And whatever it once meant to the hands that shaped it, that meaning drifts now, quietly, like something carried on a very slow current. Imagine drifting upward slowly, above the clouds, above the soft blue arc of the world, and then settling gently down onto a small island in the ancient Aegean Sea. The island of Crete lies there quietly, its hills golden in the early light, its olive groves still and silver in the gentle wind. It was here, in the ruins of a Minoan palace called Phaistos, that something very old and very quiet was found resting beneath the earth. An Italian archaeologist named Luigi Pernia reached into a storage room beneath the palace floor in the summer of 1908. And from the cool dark earth he lifted a disc of fired clay, small enough to rest in both his open hands. The disc was roughly the size of a dinner plate, baked hard, the color of warm sand, and covered on both sides with a spiral of pressed symbols. Each symbol had been pressed into the soft clay with a separate carved stamp before the disc was fired, making it one of the earliest known examples of movable type. There are 241 of these small images arranged in a slow spiral, each one separated from the next by a carved line, like words on a quiet page. Among the symbols there are figures that look like a walking man, a plumed head, a fish, a bee, a hand, a ship, and many forms no one has ever fully named. It is thought to be around 3,600 years old, dating to the time of the early Minoan civilization, a Bronze Age world that flourished quietly on this island long ago. The palace of Phaistos itself was large and graceful, its corridors paved in smooth gypsum, its courtyards open to the sky and the warm Cretan sun. The Minoans were a civilization of traders and craftspeople, their ships moving quietly between the islands carrying oil, wool, bronze, and things we can only imagine now. They left behind beautiful pottery, painted palace walls, and a few systems of writing that scholars still work gently to understand. But the disc stands apart from all of it, because unlike the other Minoan scripts, these particular symbols have never appeared anywhere else in the world. Scholars have searched through thousands of inscriptions from the ancient Mediterranean, and not one other object carries this same set of signs. And so the disc rests in the Heraklion Archaeological Museum on Crete, inside a glass case, the symbols patient and still, waiting without urgency for anyone who might understand. Many quiet people over many decades have tried to read it, sitting with magnifying glasses and notebooks, writing their own careful guesses in soft pencil. Some have believed it is a prayer, spoken slowly to a deity whose name we no longer know, the words circling inward like a chant settling into stillness. Others have thought it might be a calendar, the spiral tracking months or seasons, the symbols counting the slow turning of a Bronze Age year. A few researchers have proposed it as a hymn or a poem, its rhythm meant to be spoken aloud, vowels and consonants arranged in patterns that carry a kind of music. The truth is that no one knows, and perhaps that is the most honest and restful thing that can be said about it. What we do know is that whoever made it took great care, pressing each symbol with a steady hand, one by one, into the yielding clay. The same stamps were used more than once, which means the maker carried a small set of carved tools and could arrange these thoughts, or words, in any order. It is a technology that looks almost familiar, like a tiny printing press made of fired earth, used by someone who wanted their message to last. And it did last, resting undisturbed in that buried room beneath the palace for 36 centuries, while kingdoms rose and dissolved above it. Outside the museum, the hills of Crete roll on softly toward the south coast, where the Libyan Sea is calm and pale this time of year. It is easy to imagine the disc being made somewhere along those hills, perhaps in a room with a low window and the smell of the sea coming in slowly. The person who made it has no name in any record we can read, and perhaps that makes the object feel more gentle, not less. It was not made by a king whose name we carve in stone, but by someone who held a small stamp and pressed it carefully, trying to say something. Whatever that something was, it traveled quietly through 3,500 years and arrived here, inside the cool air of a museum on a warm island. The disc sits still inside the glass, and in the evening when the visitors have gone, the museum falls into a long and gentle silence. And outside the windows the Aegean moves in its slow and ancient way, breathing in and out against the rocks below the city. The symbols on the disc have no voice now, only the soft presence of something made with care, by hands that knew what they were doing, in a world very far away. And it rests there still, patient and undisturbed, as the island of Crete breathes slowly in the warm night air all around it. Where once there was open water and drifting wind, now there is only stone, warm, ancient, and utterly still. The Great Pyramid of Giza rises from the desert as it has for more than 4,000 years, patient and unhurried in the morning light. Its 4 triangular faces catch the early sun slowly, each stone fitted so precisely that a blade of grass could not slip between them. For centuries, travelers came and stood at its base and simply looked upward, wondering what lay hidden inside. Inside, the known passages are narrow and quiet, corridors of polished stone that lead to chambers already mapped and measured long ago. The grand gallery rises above the main corridor like a tall, sloping hall, its corbelled ceiling reaching into the warm stillness above. At the heart of the pyramid lies the king's chamber, a room of polished red granite that has waited in silence for thousands of years. The red granite was carried hundreds of miles across the desert, each block heavier than anything most of us will ever touch. Above the king's chamber, a series of relieving chambers was built to carry the enormous weight of stone pressing from above. In one of those upper spaces, explorers found old graffiti left by the ancient workers themselves, their names, their teams, their quiet marks in the stone. Those handprints of history are still there today, resting in the quiet dark above the room where tourists pass far below. For a long time, scholars believed the pyramid had been fully explored, that all its rooms and passages had been found and catalogued. Then, gently and without fanfare, a new kind of listening began, instruments that could peer through solid stone without ever lifting a chisel. The technique used particles from outer space, muons, raining down through the atmosphere as they have for billions of years, passing through stone as easily as air. When muons encounter an empty space inside the pyramid, they arrive in greater numbers, a faint, invisible signal that something hollow lies within. In 2017, researchers announced quietly that the scans had revealed something unexpected, a large void above the Grand Gallery, hidden for thousands of years. It is at least 30 meters long, perhaps more, a space larger than most rooms in a modern house, resting silently above the ancient hall below. Nobody has entered it, and no one knows quite what it looks like inside, whether its walls are smooth granite, rough limestone, or something else entirely. It may be a construction corridor, built to ease the pressure of stone during building, and sealed when its purpose was complete. Or it may be something else entirely, a room that held meaning or function that we have not yet imagined, still resting in its unbroken quiet. Scans have also hinted at other anomalies lower in the structure, areas where the stone behaves strangely, where the signal falters without explanation. There is a small notch on the north face of the pyramid that has never been fully explained, a shallow depression in the stone whose purpose remains unrecorded. And beneath the pyramid, far below the desert floor, there are hints of passages and chambers that the ancient builders left sealed and silent. An unfinished subterranean chamber lies directly beneath the apex, cut into the bedrock, then abandoned, its ceiling rough and its floor strewn with ancient debris. No one agreed on why the builders stopped there, whether plans changed, or whether the chamber served a purpose that was quietly completed elsewhere. The pyramid keeps its own time. The same sun rises over its apex as rose over the workers who placed its final casing stone, somewhere near the very top. Somewhere above 480 feet, the very peak of the pyramid was once capped with polished white limestone that caught the sun like a lantern. That capstone is gone now, removed or fallen in some forgotten era, leaving the pyramid open to the sky at its highest point. From far above, the pyramid looks almost small against the vastness of the Sahara, a precise triangle resting on an ocean of pale and undisturbed sand. The hidden void above the Grand Gallery remains sealed, as it has been since the pyramid was completed and the workers quietly laid down their tools. Whatever rests inside that space, whether air and emptiness or something more deliberate, has not been disturbed for more than 4,000 years. Slowly, the science continues, patient instruments placed carefully at the pyramid's base, listening in their quiet way for whatever the stone might reveal. The pyramid does not hurry, and neither does the inquiry. Both are content to wait, as they have always waited, in the long and unhurried stillness of the desert. And so the pyramid stands, as it has always stood, full of questions it does not answer, holding its silence gently, patient in the ancient light. The air grows warmer now, drifting away from those cold northern waters into the soft humid heat of the Belizean jungle. Somewhere deep in that green stillness, beneath vines and centuries of quiet, lie the stones of Lebanton. The Maya built this city without mortar, setting each stone block upon another with a patience that is difficult to imagine. It was a city of plazas and platforms, of step terraces climbing gently toward the sky above the jungle canopy. For centuries it stood untouched, known only to the forest and the slow rains of the tropics. Then, in the early 1920s, a young woman named Anna Mitchell Hedges wandered these ruins with her father. She was 17 years old, and the jungle was very still that morning when her eye caught something gleaming beneath a fallen altar stone. It was a skull, carved from a single piece of clear rock crystal, almost perfectly shaped to human proportions. The crystal was so transparent that light passed through it the way light passes through still, shallow water. It weighed about 5 kilograms, and holding it, people said, felt like holding something that did not quite belong to ordinary things. The jaw was separate, hinged in a way that allowed it to move, which made the skull feel quietly, almost breathlessly alive. Gemologists and engineers who later examined it could find no tool marks anywhere on the crystal's surface. The quartz had been shaped, somehow, to a precision that the tools of the ancient Maya world should not have been able to achieve. Some researchers suggested it would have taken several hundred years of patient grinding to produce such a form without fracturing the crystal. Others said that number felt impossible too, and quietly set their notebooks down. The skull was taken to the British Museum, where experts examined it carefully and returned it without a firm conclusion. Later it went to the Hewlett-Packard laboratories, where engineers used polarized light to study the crystal's internal structure. They found that the crystal had been shaped against its natural optical axis, something that seemed to defy the expected direction of work. One engineer noted quietly that this should have shattered the skull during carving, and yet there it sat, whole and unbroken. The Lebantan ruins themselves added their own quiet strangeness to the story. Unlike most Maya cities, Lebantan had no stele, no carved monuments recording the names of kings or the dates of events. It was a city that had left almost no written record of itself, as though it had preferred silence. The crystal skull and the silent city seemed to belong to each other in that way, both offering presence without explanation. Over the following decades, other crystal skulls appeared in collections and museums around the world, each one slightly different. Some were later shown to carry traces of modern tool work, but the Mitchell-Hedges skull remained harder to place in any certain category. Slowly, the skull passed from person to person, from institution to institution, always drawing the same careful silence from those who handled it. Anna Mitchell-Hedges kept it for most of her life, setting it sometimes on a windowsill where the afternoon light could move through it. She said it was simply beautiful, and perhaps that was the truest thing anyone had said about it. The jungle at Lebantan grows slowly back each year, covering a little more of what was once a busy and intricate city. The stones are still there, patient in the heat, waiting in their fitted rows with no mortar and no explanation. Above the ruins, the canopy sways very slowly, and somewhere a bird calls once and then goes quiet. The crystal skull, wherever it rests now, holds the same light it has always held, without comment and without end. And the jungle keeps its long, unhurried patience around the stones where it was found, as it always has. Somewhere in that green and humid warmth, the question rests as lightly as the mist that settles each evening on the stones. Somewhere far away, there is a silence so complete that even the wind seems to pause before moving through the stone corridors. Deep in the rainforests of southern Mexico, the ancient city of Palenque rests beneath a canopy of ceiba trees and morning mist. The temples here were built by the Maya over many centuries, each stone laid with a quietness that still lingers in the air. At the heart of this city stands the Temple of the Inscriptions, its stepped pyramid rising slowly above the treetops like a slow exhale. Inside, a long hidden staircase descends gently into the earth, cool and still, as though the stone itself is breathing softly. At the bottom of those stairs, sealed for more than 1,000 years, rested a sarcophagus carved from a single block of limestone. The lid that covered it was immense and flat, its surface covered in carvings so detailed that they took years to slowly understand. In the center of the lid, a human figure reclines gently, surrounded by a great flowing design that seems to reach in all directions. Scholars would come to recognize this figure as Pakal the Great, a Maya king who ruled Palenque for nearly 70 years. He died around the year 683, and the sarcophagus was sealed beneath the pyramid with a care and deliberateness that still feels palpable. The lid itself weighs several tons, carved with a patience and precision that suggests years of slow and devoted work. Along the edges of the lid, ancestral figures rise gently from the earth, each one emerging as though from a long and peaceful sleep. Above the reclining Pakel rises a great tree, its roots descending into the underworld and its branches reaching upward toward the sky. A serpent winds through those branches, and at the very top, a celestial bird rests with an air of absolute stillness. To the Maya, this scene described a passage, not an ending, but a slow and graceful movement from one world into another. Yet in the decades after it was first uncovered, people looked at this lid and saw something entirely unexpected in its intricate lines. Some observers, tracing the shape of the central figure, believed they could see a person seated inside some kind of mechanical vessel. The figure's posture, with knees drawn up and hands extended, seemed to some eyes strikingly similar to something from the modern world. The notion arose quietly that this ancient carving might depict an astronaut, seated in a spacecraft, surrounded by controls and fire. Mainstream scholars have always understood the scene as Maya cosmology, a king descending on the world tree toward the underworld at death. And yet the question, once planted, drifted gently through popular imagination for many years like a slow current in still water. What is certain is the extraordinary refinement of the carving itself, each detail placed with an assurance that suggests deep and practiced knowledge. The jade burial mask of Pakel, found resting upon his face inside the sarcophagus, remains one of the most serene objects ever recovered. Piece by piece the jade tiles were fitted together in life, each one a shade different from the next, creating something calm and luminous. The burial chamber walls were painted with 9 figures representing the lords of the underworld, each standing quietly in procession. Those 9 figures still watch over the empty chamber today, their stone faces calm and unhurried in the stillness of the pyramid. Above ground, the Temple of the Inscriptions takes its name from the great panels of Maya glyphs that line its inner walls. Those glyphs record histories, dates, and names, a slow and careful accounting of everything the city wished to preserve. Palenque itself was largely unknown to the outside world until the 18th century, when travelers began to push slowly through the jungle. Even then, the pyramid held its secret for another 2 centuries, waiting beneath the forest floor with a quiet and total patience. The sarcophagus lid was finally uncovered in 1952, when archaeologist Alberto Rusluwilier noticed that the floor of the temple had peculiar holes in it. He and his team cleared the rubble slowly over several field seasons, descending step by step into a place no one had entered for over a millennium. When the sealed stone door was finally moved aside, the air that met them was cool and still, carrying the quiet of a very long time. And there it rested, the great carved lid, undisturbed, its figures and symbols as patient and complete as the day they were placed. Whatever it truly shows, the lid remains there still, cool, ancient, quietly unreadable, resting at the heart of a slow and patient forest.